due to our infrastructure deficit, and whether that's the power challenges, whether that's the challenges of road network and transportation, and all of these leads to very high operational costs, compared to the global average, and even when it's compared to the African or the West African average. We also have the environment and climate factors which lead to impact the lifespan of the M&E and the other equipment which is in the building. And so similarly to asset management, there are some deficits in terms of technical skills, although that is definitely improving. With the likes of Femi here and what Alphamede are doing in the market, and Brawl and other companies as well. So as I said, I'm not going to talk too much about the opportunities. I'm going to leave those to the panel discussion, which we're just about to have. And so it was very brief, very short, because I just want to focus on the discussion and then hopefully a Q&A afterwards. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. And just to reintroduce the panel again, on my immediate left is Funke Okobadejo, who's the Director of Actis West Africa. Next to Funke, we have Chinwe Ajenisanya, who is the Business Development Director for Rendeavor. And on my far left, we have Femi Akitunde, who is the Chief Executive and Managing Director of Alphamede Group. So I'm just going to ask each panelist just to give an overview of the asset and facility management landscape from their different perspectives. I'll start with Funke.
Thank you. So as Bolaji said, I work with Actis. We are a global emerging markets investor, and one of the classes which we invest in is real estate. Initially just in sub-Saharan Africa, and now more recently also in Asia. And so my perspective is going to be in terms of an investor and what we've looked at over the years in terms of what has been themed facilities management, property management, and I'll call it asset management. And I'll try to make some of the distinctions that we look at in there. So going back in 2005, when our first investment in Nigeria was a Palm shopping mall, at that time, I think we looked at the landscape and tried to understand, who would help in managing this asset. And I think it was on the back of that, we were able to seed that business to Brawl, who has taken over this conference today. So I think we like that part of our history of being able to bring new players into the market. And the whole essence was that as an investor, we obviously don't have the skills for property management for a specialist asset, and that asset class actually was non-existent in Nigeria at that stage. If I sort of look further back, sometimes I think my first internship job was actually with Wema Bod Estates many, many eons ago. And I remember, so Wema Bod Estate is this government-owned entity owned by the Southwest state governments and owned a number of the buildings that you have on the Lagos CBD, which were, I think Unity House, Western House, Lapal House, and all these entities there. And the way they operated at that point in time, it was an all in-house thing, wherein the asset management, property management, and all the FM was done in-house, including, I think they had their own cleaners and all of that. And you find out that the industry has evolved over the years, wherein facilities management, outsourcing has come into the market. I think you now have the evolutions of the business like Alpha Meet, that specialist FM players, in terms of helping investors to fully understand how to manage the assets over the life cycle of the asset itself. Also, like I mentioned, property management, which is essentially is going to maximize the value of those assets for the next 40 years. What are the skills that you need to ensure that there's a full alignment between the investors and the owners of the asset? Because there's so many players on the value chain, and if there's no alignment of interest, then you're going to have a huge agency factor. I don't have any history or anything to talk about. I was a very, very lowly intern many years ago. But it hurts me to see that, you can't, I'm sure if I ask, no one has been into or maybe has an office in Western House or La Pal House. And these were the premier buildings in the 70s and the 80s. So as a proud person who's been involved in developing one of the grade A properties of today that has just come into the market, and there are a number of them, I think what would happen in 40 years, would there be someone coming and talking about how these assets were good in the heydays, and they're now today potentially some form of death traps or something to go into that? And I think there's a big thing that we need to try to deal with, which is understanding what needs to go into having proper asset management to ensure the full value of the assets are there. I know Balaji mentioned a few things in terms of what have happened, and I don't think I really want to delve into the past. We had this major crash. Here for me, it's just about the skills and knowledge to ensure that in every market you are optimizing the performance of the asset. So let me stop there. Pass on to.
So, Funke, just one quite further question, just a brief one. Obviously, Actis have a large portfolio across sub-Saharan Africa. Do you have or do you experience these same challenges with asset managers in, say, Ghana or Kenya, or is it something which is specific to Nigeria, or is it something which is sort of general to sub-Saharan Africa outside of South Africa?
Yeah, I think, to be fair, I think it's something that is generic, that you do have the problem, because in most of these markets there hasn't been as much investment. So one of the key things why we've entered into this market is the demand-supply imbalance at that time, wherein there weren't really significant amount of investments there. So I think a lot of the markets are on the journey. I think the challenge could be a little different in the respective markets. But I would say definitely it's only South Africa and maybe some parts of Southern Africa that stands head and shoulders above the rest. So it is a challenge that is pervasive.
Chinwe, the same question to you. Obviously, Rendeavour similarly has a larger portfolio of existing assets and obviously development opportunities as well. And just want to understand from your perspective, what are your overview of the asset and the facility, as well as the property management for the properties that you oversee?
Thank you, Balaji. I work with Rendeavour, and just to give a little bit of background, Rendeavour are the largest urban land developers in sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason is we have about 12,000 hectares of property of land across 5 different geographies, 5 different countries, 7 different projects. In average, range is between 1,000 hectares to 2,000 hectares. Our largest project being in DRC with 4,000 hectares. Clearly, our initial strategy is really to come in, we acquire the land, 0% debt-free. It's debt-free for as our value proposition. And we then put in the infrastructure, being electricity, gas, water, disposal, sewage, fiber, and then we maintain the infrastructure into perpetuity. And hence we see ourselves as providing a unique offering to the market and looking at a way to address at least a portion of the challenges about longevity, about these properties, and maintaining capital appreciation. What Funke and what you have said, Bolaji, is right. What we've seen and have experienced, and it's not just typical to Nigeria, it's other African countries, is the lack of maintenance into the duration of the lifespan of the property, which technically really should be 10, 15, 20 years. And there are many aspects, if you break them down, there are many aspects that are lacking. You mentioned skills. It's, again, the lack of understanding between the asset managers or the owners, the off-takers, in understanding the value and the importance of maintaining that value all the way to perpetuity. And then also the lack of skills in maintaining the facility. Skills in the asset managers in understanding what are the unique features of the property and how do you market it accurately and how do you respond to changing market dynamics, such as, yes, there was a good example is this recession and the need to quickly adjust to the reality of a market or off-takers who do not have the dollars or have the need for such a wide space. How do you react or how do you predict that this type of things will occur? Because those crashes happen and they have a far lasting impact. And then coming all the way down to the facility, but then in our case, for example, it's the infrastructure, because that's the challenge that also exists a lot. Yeah. Sometimes you do have players that come in and they deal with the top structure, they deal with providing the class and the quality, as what Funke has mentioned, of what Actis, R&B, and the other players that have come in. But then you now have to then deal with the infrastructure around, the infrastructure to ensure that you can maintain these properties, because you may do your best on that up structure, but how about underground? As we have seen, just look around Lagos. This city was not built for 20 million people. Now we are 20 million people. What do we do? How do you, in terms of zoning and planning, how do you then adjust in such a way to deal with urbanization and population growth? And I believe that's what Rendeavour is looking to do, especially with the satellite cities that we've built. With the satellite cities, it's coming in and saying, well, we believe the growth corridor is expanding to a certain direction. And as a result, let's get there before the urbanization gets there, take over a particular portion and be responsible and it's almost like a responsible citizen to put in the infrastructure but maintain that zoning so that the challenges that you are seeing currently in terms of what we are, and I'm just using Lagos, but it's the same thing as Accra and Kenya, that whole growth, so that those challenges don't exist. So I'm not sure, I think it kind of addresses the kind of challenges and unique solutions that each of us are looking at to bring to the table to address what is really a big, far-reaching issue at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Chinwe. And so Femi, you are coming at it from a different angle to these two as owners of land and owners of property as well. So you come from the service provider perspective. So and I think it's very apt to sort of hear what your thoughts are.
Okay, thank you very much, Bolaji. Interestingly, one of the things that give us what I would consider a very strong edge is that I've been on that side of the table as well. I used to manage real estate and infrastructure for Shell, where I spent about 12 years. And actually, that was the greatest motivation for us to come into this industry when I left Shell. When I discovered that actually the quality of real estate and infrastructure services that big corporations like that enjoy is not generally available to everybody in the market, because for so many reasons, people can't afford them, people can't develop the capacity, and you can't roll out. So this is one of the things that has been of tremendous advantage, that I can understand from the client end as a client and also now as a service provider, so I can connect the two dots. Now, what has been the evolution of the facility management industry over the past 10, 15 years that we came into the industry? We met an industry that was greatly underserved for so many reasons and highly challenged. In the first instance, the number of players in that industry is not adequate to serve the market. Number two, the mortality rate of companies in that industry is very, very high. There are so many players who set up FM company, they see the opportunities, they come into the market, they want to provide service. Within 1 year or 2 years, they get overwhelmed, and then they fizzle out or go into something else, or they start renting, looking for, convert to property agents and stuff like that. Our focus from day one has been that this will be our bread and butter. We see the challenge, we see the opportunity, and we believe strongly that the market requires our service, and we're going to enter into it in a very big way. So we can say clearly that up till today, that industry is still very, very immature. It has not grown. The competition is still very, very weak. And these are the challenges that both on the demand side and the supply side we are all facing. What's our perspective of the market? We've dimensioned the market into different categories. And each of the category has its own peculiar needs and peculiar challenges. And unless we can focus on those needs clearly and provide solutions, we're not going to make progress by trying to offer general solutions to everybody. So let me start with the first class, residential properties. Residential estates in Nigeria, we are moving more towards communal living estates, where people see benefit in shared services. So I build my house, I provide my generator, I provide my water, my everything. But when you live in a communal estate, you have services to share. And your cost of operation is expected to go down, efficiency and service availability should improve. So we are seeing that trend, and it's growing. We are getting more estates now in Nigeria than it used to be. Everybody to himself, God for us all. Everybody wants to take care of the four walls of his own apartment, but who takes care of the common services, common areas? This is where facility managers come in and provide that service. As residential assets, you are providing service both to the occupants as well as to the owners. Why do people need FM services there? They want a good return on their investment when they invest in housing or residential estate, because we have developers that specialize in that class of asset. We also have people who are tenants. They also want to enjoy good living, good security, good safety, comfort. So these are the areas where we need to tailor our services. The second category are the commercial real estates. And commercial real estate, what we've seen in that space also is that there's also a trend. Nigeria is moving from the tradition of each person having his own shop. We're moving more towards the Western culture of shopping in malls. And when you get to that space, the traditional approach of servicing those little shops won't work again. You need capacity, both in terms of complexity of the systems that you are dealing with and in terms of the size of the assets you are dealing with. So the methodology has to change, and this is where facility management comes in. We're also looking at commercial offices. We're now beginning to see investors who are building offices to rent out to people. So what is important to the commercial FM space is people invest in this asset to make good return. And that is where the customers who stay there become very important. So two key things that are at risk. First is the investment in those assets. Your first risk is, how do I bring this asset to the market? Office or mall? Second is, how do I attract good tenants to this facility to ensure I'm able to meet up with my repayment, either to your investors or to the banks where your debt originated from. One sure way to guarantee this, which a lot of people have overlooked over the years, is quality and efficient facility management services. If you fail to provide that, you may be able to attract good tenants through very good marketing and sales strategy, but you cannot retain them. People want to enjoy good service, and then they will stay. We've also discovered that whenever people talk about FM services being cost, it depends on which angle you are looking at. If you look at it from cost angle, you only see cost. When you look at it from the value angle, you will see value that is given to you. But I bet you, engaging quality facility management service, what you pay them is very insignificant to the value you get out of their service for the good ones. You get good value, you get cost reduction opportunities, and we have several examples of that. So that's a trend we've seen in the commercial space. The other space that we see that is coming up strongly is the healthcare FM space. Our hospitals are not in good condition in Nigeria, and we need to begin to look at it differently. To see a hospital like a hotel, you have patients that are admitted, you have patients who go in and come out. They want to go to a place where they are seeking service. And we say that this is another area. Then we have convention centers like this, where you also need quality FM service. Then let me now go to the corporate real estate. The corporates, we see the trend we see there is that we have the multinationals who are operating locally. We have local companies like the SMEs and small and medium size local companies, but we also now have global multinationals who want to do global deals. And when they want to do global deals, everywhere is clear to them. The global deal will work in America, it will work in Europe, it will work in Middle East, it will work in Asia. But when it comes to Nigeria, they see a black box. How do we illuminate Africa and connect the dots between Africa to this global real estate strategy for this big multinational? That is one area where I believe that Nigeria has to play a part. We are 25% of the sub-Saharan Africa, and that market is huge. And unless we demonstrate the capacity, these globals will never look in our direction. They will always find other ways to provide their service. They need quality work environment for their workers that will enhance productivity, and for them to get maximum value from the employees that they pay every day. Every time that there is a power shortage, there's no water, you distract their attention. They are not contributing, but salary for that day is already paid. So what does it cost you to get a quality facility management company to partner with you and deliver this service so that you can maximize return from the investment in your employees? So this is the trend, this is the evolution, and this is where we believe that we have to raise the bar in Nigeria. And AFAMID is doing a lot in all these sectors. And in terms of connecting Africa, we're operating in about 10 African countries now. We're in Kenya, we're in Ghana, we're in Rwanda, we're in Botswana. This makes it easy for them to see access to Africa to provide this service. You hit one company, it gives you access to 10 countries in terms of service. And the challenges to enter all these countries, they are huge, but we believe we have to crack them. And AFAMID is moving ahead to crack this and make Nigeria accessible and Africa to the rest of the world in this space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Femi. I think you sort of touched upon a number of points which I want to sort of follow up with, which is, looking at sort of some of the key, differences to the way that, we approach both facility, property, and asset management, compared to other countries, not just in Africa, but other countries sort of globally. We sort of talked about in this panel and also in the previous panel, the fact that there's a lack of experienced and so technically skilled asset managers in the market. But it's also the fact that we feel that sometimes as asset managers, property managers, and maybe even facility managers, we take a sort of short-term view. I think that's partly been led by the recession that we've been in, and it's been sort of firefighting rather than having a long-term perspective. But I just want to sort of ask this of Chinwe and Funke as well. Chinwe, first of all, I mean, obviously you've had real estate experience in Paris and in America and maybe other countries as well that I'm not aware of. But how is your sort of experience with these services in Nigeria, both with Rendeavour and with JLL, so compared to what you experienced and did when you were working in Europe and in America?
Well, as you can imagine, it's there's definitely a vast difference. In Europe, in America, I think it's just a better understanding and awareness of these issues that we're talking about. They understand. And hence, the systems and the processes are very integrated. So when we're talking about asset managers, what we're seeing, or what the challenge we're talking about is everyone seems to be working in the past in silos. I think we're definitely making adjustments now. Now that a number of professionals, as you've seen here, have come in and are highlighting the challenges with working in silos. But when we're talking, what I would say is from my experience from the US to Paris, even when I was working in the military for the US, one of the things that everyone sought to do was to bring an integrated approach so that the assets from the asset managers who are dealing with the owners who are acquiring these assets to immediately bring into the table as part of the conversation the facilities managers. They are brought in and all of that taken into account before a deal is done, because everyone is understanding the importance of maintaining this asset all the way to fruition and all the way 10 years. And part of the conversation is also the municipalities. They are also brought in because the municipalities that you're dealing with are motivated to bring in, they understand the value of bringing in these businesses, they understand the value of ensuring that the ease of business, hand-holding are in place because they see the long-term vision. And so by bringing that collaborative approach is what I have seen and have experienced in the US, in France, and that's what has been lacking or what is changing. Because I always like to put a more positive spin. I definitely will say there's a change. And the changes are occurring more and more because I think, and Funke, you tell me, when I came back to Nigeria just before the crisis, there was a general euphoria around assets. And I think that's what almost encouraged or supported the fact that everyone continued to work in their silos. Say, we're making money, everything is great, so why bother? And it's almost like use money to patch the problem because everyone is thinking short term. But with the crisis, it's led to an adjustment of mindset, an adjustment that said, okay, this crisis came unexpectedly and much deeper and much more profound than most people had anticipated. And there's a lot of lessons learned. Let's take the time to gain the lessons learned and make the corrections. And I think that's what you're seeing now in the kind of conversations that take place, whereby folks such as Funke and P would have a totally different conversation with Alpha Mead or with Brawl. Now everyone is being brought into the conversation at the beginning to say, how do we solve this? How do we solve this so that when I'm going in and talking to my investors or going back and giving reports regarding what is expected yield or returns for this property, you all are aware of that and we all are tied at the hip so that you understand these decisions or this feedback immediately affects you. And what can you do on your end to ensure that my property is being represented in such a way that the off-taker has come in? So I see that that's the language that is changing. And I also see that is one of the reasons why there's a greater emphasis or success, what we're seeing for Endeavor. That conversation now goes all the way down to the infrastructure and down to the land. Because now players, not even talking about our project here in Lekki, which is at the free trade zone that is recent, but I believe that's one of the reasons for the success, for example, of Tattoo, which is a project in Kenya. The project now is the largest industrial zone over the past 6 years. It's a 6-year project. It's become that. Why? Because a number of international players are excited to see, oh, we now have a partner that understands the long-term vision. It's the challenges that we are seeing in other industrial hubs here that players came in, but because they were dealing with partners who didn't see that long-term vision, you're having issues with infrastructure that has led to, someone put it articulately yesterday, a major player leaving the country. Why would the major player leaving? There's a break in that value chain. There's a break in what's happening with the government, a break in what's happening with the ownership, the break in what's happening with off-takers, and not allowing everyone to participate has led to this company saying, look, I am not seeing it. I am not seeing and I'm not feeling my value here being protected. And my partners in here are not understanding that they too are impacted. And hence, they've left. What we're seeing, hopefully, is the lessons learned. And that's what Endeavor has done, is there's a lessons learned. Let's identify other partners who really value what we're bringing into the table long term. And let's partner with those. And I think there's a change in the conversation as a result.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you and I sort of moved back to Nigeria around about the same time, sort of the autumn of 2014, so just before the markets started to fall, and I think that prior to that, there was a sense that the economy was growing very strongly. The real estate market, which is obviously linked to the economy, was also going very strongly. So it was a sense that everyone was making money, whether your product was good, bad, or indifferent. And we can see now from the products that are out there that even whether it's the commercial office buildings or the retail, the ones that have the ones that are leasing up are the product that has been properly planned and is probably so targeted to the market. And obviously Actis building a heritage place is a very good example of that. But Funke, obviously with Heritage Place and the other properties that you are looking after both here in Nigeria and maybe in Ghana as well, are there changes to the way that you're viewing both the asset management as well as the property management and facility management in the new environment that we find ourselves in?
I think when you talk about the new environment, it's just sort of like a new reality. And I think, as mentioned, the earlier you get to time with the new reality, the better. And I think you've also mentioned in terms of what the rents are and the reduction in values and all of that. But I think, just thinking through the whole process, I think what Chinwe mentioned is quite apt, which is, starting with the end in mind. And so I ask people, or people ask me, why we seem to have done at least in a difficult environment fairly well compared to what could be deemed to be our peers. And I think it was always about starting with the end in mind. It goes back to what the lady this morning mentioned, which is what are the buyers looking for? So we've always done better when we have that buyer that has the checklist and says, we want X, Y, Z. I think yesterday Fioma mentioned something about the health and safety. It's a non-negotiable. And you'll be surprised about the tiny reasons or the little reasons why some of the other buildings did not lease up. It could be just about the thread of your staircase being less than the safety to ensure that people can get out of the building. It could be the incline of your ramp not deemed to be safe. And that takes an entire building, a significant amount of investment. And I think yesterday also, I think Erejua mentioned about getting advice early on in the whole process and how difficult or, how costly is it not to get that advice, because some of those things we cannot be changed in the whole process. So one is in terms of how you build it. The second point is in terms of the ease of maintenance over the life of the asset. So one of key things, that was in building Heritage Place, they looked at the structure for the cladding. And the structure for the cladding is one that you can replace the cladding from inside the building. So you don't need to have a scaffolding. So we've had accidents where something has chipped off on a cladding on the 10th floor. How costly would it have been if we needed to put in a scaffolding to get up there, to clean the building? So there's a lot of detail that goes into what all the professional consultants put within the final product. That is very important, and you need to ensure you have that over the process. We've always ensured in the projects we've done where we have international consultants, but working toe-to-toe with local consultants in the same room saying, okay, thank you for this great idea you're bringing, but it will not work because X, Y, Z. And, and then we think that helps bring out a better product ultimately. So I think that's where we've gone. That's the benefit of what we've done, and it's relying on a lot of people with project managers, development managers during the development phase, moving into property managers and facility management team over the life. I think, I don't know, you've not asked me this question, but my point is, what else can be done and what else should be done going forward, maybe close to what you mentioned about opportunities, for me will be, we need to leverage technology even more. We need to leverage technology in terms of, the operational information so that we can measure how we're performing. If you can't measure it, you can't even monitor and really check how are you doing against the competition sometimes to say, how do you position yourself? I think for me, the benefit also is as you have investors who are not you have assets in different markets, the use of technology will be helpful by the property management teams and facilities management teams for allow remote monitoring of these assets. In terms of asset management, and I think the last point for me is also in terms of understanding how happy your tenants are, because as it was just mentioned, it's one thing to have good quality tenants, it's one thing for them to be happy in the building, and your cash flows and everything goes off the table if they leave your building. So you need to ensure that the tenant satisfaction is very key, and you can quickly monitor how quickly their complaints are being addressed. And leveraging technology, I think, is going to be key going forward in terms of quality information, timely information for decision making. At Actis, we've employed in-house asset managers who are specialist asset managers who work with the property management teams and facilities management team. But I think that's an opportunity that could be potentially outsourced entirely. So you can have, the big investors who have billions of dollars under management. I know that they probably don't even bother to have asset management being done in-house. So that's also another opportunity that could be added on to be outsourced.
Okay,
I'm wondering if we could bring in some comments maybe from the audience. Right.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, panel. Interesting to hear the feedback. I'd like to pick up directly on with Mr. Kintuni, and perhaps others can chip in around quality. Because at the end of the day, quality for me is relative. You know, what someone thinks is a quality product may be different from others. And we've talked about the various clients or tenants, occupiers in the buildings. The multinationals, and as Funke rightly said, have very high expectations. You know, anything can make or break the difference in terms of whether they continue to stay in or stay on in the buildings. We've gone down the model of outsourcing, fully outsourcing, but very, very detailed. Banks, to a large extent, would, or multinationals actually, to a large extent, would be very, very heavy on compliance, on risks, on security, on the things, on the governance of how the building is maintained. Because that quality ultimately results in value, that quality also results in costs, in the cost differentials. I struggle because we don't get that quality in Nigeria. End of conversation. I know that, I believe Heritage Place is being managed in-house. Oh, you've outsourced it. Okay, right. My concern is, what do we need to do to step our facility management service to meet global standards? The bane of my life is getting FM right. And we hear the Nigeria factor. We understand the issues around importation. We understand, but we ourselves, until we get, in my view, to a mindset change that quality can be achieved, and we can do it and do it right, and convince those who need to invest in our assets that we've got the right product and the right quality of products to get there. So I'm looking for something beyond where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Anna's just spoken the way our typical client will speak. But the truth of the matter is that, I know. I'd like us to let's take an helicopter view of the whole situation. The starting point is, what is our understanding of the current state of play in this market? When you compare standard in Nigeria to other parts of the world, you need to put it in perspective. How difficult or relatively easy is it for a facility management company to operate in Nigeria compared to operate in America, in Europe? We are dealing with an environment that is, to a large extent, very, very unstructured and very difficult, both in terms of physical infrastructure and in terms of business operating environment. An average businessman today in Nigeria is struggling with a whole lot of issues, from funding to regulatory issues to quality of resources to everything. And it's not different from facilities management. So where I stand is this, and it's easy for me to stand this way because in my life, I've worked with only 3 companies before setting up AlphaMeet. It's Nestle, it's Shell. 17 years with multinational, and I'm talking global Fortune 500. So what did we do differently? And I can tell you those 2 companies are not struggling the way the rest of us are struggling in the market. You need to take a holistic view to say, we have a common interest here. The situation in Nigeria is this: no public water supply, no power that is regular. Overseas, you press the switch, light comes up. Here, facility manager will have to deal with issues about utility provision first at that level. You are dealing with the issue of cleanliness. To explain to somebody what a standard multinational office should look like in terms of perception is a big issue here. So we have to take a position that multinational big companies must also invest in building the capacity. If you don't build the capacity, you will not get the capacity to utilize. The second issue has to do with partnership. Our orientation has to be more in terms of partnership than being judgmental. What I see is that the big multinational come to the negotiation table with the big stick, big hammer, and you deploy that on the small companies operating in this space, the cleaning company, the technician, they can't cope with your systems. But if you invest in them, you take them and you walk them through the ladder, they will begin to understand your specifications, your requirements. I remember when I was first posted to Port Harcourt to take over the assets in the industrial area, the first thing I did was to get Shell to invest in developing the locals, the Niger Delta people, in cleaning services. We spent money. Yes, they are contractors to us, but we spent money to make them understand what is a good cleaning spec. How should the toilet look in Shell? How should the corridors look? How do you welcome visitors as receptionists? Because we must employ them. Therefore, we have to invest in them. So it makes it easy for us to multiply the number of people who could do business with us at that level. So my charge to you and other multinational companies, and I must say that building that capacity is not the easiest thing. Alphamid is able to do it today because of the scale and the platform that we have. Of close to 2,000 employees in the company with different the capacity from systems to technology. We're talking of technology. You can't do those services manually. We've invested a lot in technology that enables me to coordinate operation in over 150 locations from my desk. That's the only way you can deliver that service. But it's very expensive, I can tell you that. How many FM companies in this industry can do that? So I'm suffering from kwashiorkor of inadequate competition. I can't find them. So it's very frustrating when I'm competing for big jobs where I have invested capacity to deal and I'm being compared in terms of my delivery with companies that have not even invested anything. We're not on the same scale. And when projects are not big and they are not scalable and they are not complex, maybe it's not for Alphamid. Because the capacity that we've built is to handle those big projects. So I'm saying I want to see 2, 3, 4, 5 more of Alphamid. And I'm challenging people in this room. Let's get on board. Let's invite people. The ease of doing business is tough in Nigeria. We don't have money to do business. That's capacity. We've had to set up our own training academy where I train minimum 200 to 300 people every year. I've had to subsidize even training for my own staff to get international certification. 50% of it is paid off by Alphamid. I'm running one now, Foundation in Facility Management, 3 days training, free of charge. People who attend our interview, they can't pass. And I said, but this guy is smart. BSc Economics, BSc in Computer Science, BSc in Accounting, fantastic guy. I don't want to lose him. Bring him on board. We've done 2 like that this year, free. And we use that one to continue to develop our talent pool. This is where we stand out. And I think big companies must come to the table. You must come to the party. Let us develop this market, because if you don't develop it, you will pay dearly for it in the future. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really wish we could go on. We only have time for one very short comment.
Very short comment, and this is to clients. You need to include in your boardrooms your FM people. You get to the boardroom and you get the HR, you get the IT, but you don't have FM. Truth of the matter is that FM or good facility management is not necessarily cheaper than your rent. In our environment, it can be more expensive. So if you're looking for those savings, you may have to put that cost up front. And it's not always squeezing the FM and the property service staff down to the wire that is actually going to get you the value that you need. So it's just to buttress the point. You also need to invest.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our moderator, Bolaji Edu, and our panelists. I really wish we could go on. Very interesting conversation, but we are way behind.